Hi, hello, welcome. This is Creative Destruction Video. My name is Cameron. I'm going to talk about the 100 best films I saw this year. I saw 100 new films to me, and I would like to rank them. A couple of caveats. First thing is, the ranking is based on vibes, so the ranking could change anytime. I really just want to talk about the movies I saw this year, and I want to celebrate movies. I love movies. I love talking about movies. Please leave a comment for your favorite movies that you saw this year. They could just be new to you. They don't have to be 2023 releases. I just love talking about movies. There are some films I did not get to this year, and so they will be absent from this list. There are a couple of glaring omissions. I live in kind of a rural area, so you won't be able to see all of the new releases in time. Usually, I see the best films of the year in like February when the Oscar nominations come out, and those films come out here in a very contained format. So, if it's missing some of your favorites from this year, that's probably why. There are several instances on this list of films I should have seen before and I just never got to until this year. So there will be a couple of them that come up where you're like, wow, you never saw that? I didn't. This is my first time filming myself like this. If you are interested in more videos like this that are more casual, my usual content is scripted and heavily edited video essays. If you're interested in more casual stuff from me or off the cuff opinions about movies, please let me know. I would be interested in doing this maybe monthly instead of yearly and talk about the 10 to 15 new watches that I have every month. I think that would be a lot of fun. If you're not interested in that, also let me know. If you just want me to stick to video essays, that's also fine. This list will go from 100 to 1. I am going to break it up in the timeline below. So if you are more interested just in the top 10 or top 20, feel free to skip ahead. If you want to listen to the whole thing, also that is totally fine. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy. So number 100 comes from my Shudder subscription. I have a subscription to several horror-based, I like horror films, several horror-based services, and so Shudder is one of them. And I watched this on a whim, like on a Tuesday or something. That film is Quicksand, and it was released in 2023 on the Shudder platform. I don't know if I could tell you even three facts about it. It was extremely forgettable. I remember wanting desperately to do anything else. I wanted to look at my phone. I wanted to get up and walk around. And I did finish it, and I do have rules in place for myself. I don't like to grab from my phone or anything during a movie. I like to stay focused and give the project the attention that it deserves. But you know, it's not my favorite movie, and it is in fact my least favorite new watch of the year. It had to be somebody. It might as well be Quicksand. It's fine. I don't know. It's very cheap. It felt very cheaply made. The plotting was both predictable and inert. The characters did not feel like human beings. I just did not love Quicksand for whatever reason. There are other titles that are available on Shudder that are way higher on this list, and someone had to be the bottom of the list of 100. If the filmmakers of Quicksand are watching this video, I'm sorry, it did not vibe with me. I did not love this film. So I'm not going to mention the director of every film that we go over in this 100 list. And as I get further into the list, I am likely going to speak a lot more about these movies. But I will say that these bottom 10 do have special recognition for being particularly bad. Now, Quicksand I did not have a lot to say about, but this next one I feel like I have kind of a rant. So number 99 is Spiral from the Book of Saw, which is this movie that apparently Chris Rock was so excited about making that he, according to some article I read like 3 years ago, he like stormed the offices of Lionsgate, and they were so amazed by this pitch that they just had to make it right then and there. And from what I understand, that's kind of an apocryphal story. He was actually like at a party and said like, if I made a Saw movie, I'd do this. And they were like, oh, cool. But this is a Darren Lynn Hausman film, a Bousman film, and it is basically Seven for stupid people. So like if you're a fan of David Fincher's Seven, which is I think in a lot of ways a prototype for eventually the Saw aesthetic and the Saw morals and ethics, which I'm going to do a whole video about the Saw franchise at some point because it's like crazy the morals and ethics of that franchise are baffling to me. But if you are going to watch like Baby's first seven, maybe Spiral from the Book of Saw is for you. It is seven without any of the interest or care and without any of the filmmaking chops. Chris Rock plays kind of an unknowable detective who sometimes just does like a tight five of stand up. It is gross, but not in the way that's like fun in a Saw movie. It takes itself very seriously, which is maybe not the vibe for like the ninth Saw film. I really am just kind of baffled by like every single creative choice in this movie. Starting with the fact that Chris Rock is in it at all. I think that's just like a really strange thing to have happen in the Saw franchise. And I remember actually being kind of excited by the idea, by the prospect of it, because Chris Rock can be an interesting, dramatic performer, not in this film, but he can be good, I think, in other things. This movie is so oddly bad, and not even like a fun way. It's like in a boring way. So I don't know. Skip this one. I would not recommend it. It's not particularly good, but it is like an interesting thing that exists in the world. So maybe your mileage may vary for that. Something I really enjoy doing is collecting the Arrow box sets for the Hammer films. Now, Hammer Films is a British production company that really had a great run of B pictures, and I mean that like literally, they were the B picture of a lot of double bills. I am really interested in these B movies that are produced by Hammer and Never Take Sweets from a Stranger, or as it's known in America, Never Take Candy from a Stranger, is just a very fascinating movie that is kind of an after school special for parents who are maybe afraid of what strangers are capable of in these streets. But one of the more fascinating elements of this movie is that it's a courtroom drama about like a guy that messes with kids, and he fully just gets away with it based on all of these like weird technicalities. And like the premise of the movie is that no one seems to believe that like these kinds of men exist in society. And the ultimate message of the movie seems to be that like if there's a guy in your neighborhood who is a creep, don't let him give candy to your kids. I don't know. It's a fascinating movie. So unlike Spiral, which is kind of boring bad, this movie is actually interesting bad, and it's only like 70 minutes. I would actually really recommend going and seeing this movie with as many people as possible, because it is like every 4 minutes there's a decision made in the script or in the production where you're like, what? And so I think that's very, just, you gotta watch it. You gotta see it. Number 97 is a movie that I really thought I would like, but it turns out it's mostly just really boring. And I thought that was surprising that it's boring, but it's basically a Die Hard remake, and the whole Die Hard is it a Christmas movie thing turned into a new movie. It's Violent Night, starring David Harbour, who I think David Harbour is actually pretty good in this movie. He gives a weirdly committed performance, and it has, you know, shadows of Bad Santa, I suppose. But and John Leguizamo is fine. This movie is mostly just like kind of boring and bad, and I was disappointed. I mean, I didn't really expect a lot from this movie, but I was disappointed by how on the nose a lot of the jokes are, by how the characters aren't particularly fun or funny. The kills aren't, besides one really actually kind of great kill, the kills aren't that interesting. I feel like there is a lot of promise in this movie, and it does not really deliver on a lot of that promise. Same with this director's earlier film, Dead Snow. I feel like these are films with premises that are really, really interesting, but then once you actually get to the movie, the execution of it is kind of humdrum and doesn't really follow through on the wonderful brutality of its suggested premise. And so kind of a disappointment for me. I wish that it was a little bit more clever. I wish that it had more to say, anything to say, honestly. It doesn't seem to have that much to say at all. And yeah, I wanted a better time, and I feel like we didn't get that, which is disappointing. So if you ever wanted to watch a 2.5 hour film in which a clown plays with the entrails of his victims, Terrifier 2 is probably the thing for you. Especially if you're when you're watching a scary movie, the most important aspect of it is the gore. And I mean specifically the gore, not necessarily the kills or the scares, but like the actual anatomical parts of human flesh and bone and tissue festooned across the floors of different buildings and rooms and warehouses and however many other places. This is a disgusting movie. It is like deeply gross, and the effects are good, but like that doesn't really sustain me for an entire film. It is a very long movie. It is like 140 something minutes of a clown killing people, and there are these bits that run for very long stretches of time. There's one particular dream sequence that I feel like runs forever, and everything kind of has this weird quality of like a local TV commercial, like the photography, the lighting, the acting. I mean, all of it has this very low budget aesthetic that has the weird over processed nature of like local news. And so it's it's a deeply strange film that I can't really believe exists in the physical media abundance of this film. I mean, obviously it's a it's a winner for a lot of people, and I am the weird one perhaps from the horror movie lover community who did not like this movie very much. But there's like I feel like 10 or 12 different versions of this film you can buy physically, which is very baffling to me because this movie is really just not very good, and I'm not really sure beyond the gore what it is like doing. And so I guess the gore is the thing, but I don't really it doesn't work for me. And so this one's pretty low on my list. This year I watched some new holiday films, new for me anyway, and one of them was A New York Christmas Wedding, based on the recommendation of a friend of mine. And he basically said, there are two twists in this movie that when you get to them, you have to text me immediately and give me your reaction. And so my wife and I, we watched A New York Christmas Wedding, and we got to the first twist, and I was like, okay, this is definitely a weird movie. I don't really know why it's spending this much time on this particular subplot. And then we get to the later, even crazier twist. And I don't know if I've ever seen a movie that has a more hilarious, misplaced, and misguided plot twist ever. And so, if you are to watch this movie, which I actually do recommend watching this movie, especially with people who enjoy bad movies, this movie has at least two sequences in it where my hope is that everyone in the room is just screaming and laughing and crying and wondering how did this film get through the entire process of the production and come out. And they were like, we nailed it. This is exactly the movie we wanted to make. There's a weird amount of time spent on like the logistics of same-sex marriage in this movie that is, I guess, supposed to be a Christmas film, but there's nothing really like that Christmassy about it. It is a movie that you will just have 1 million questions about the second it's over. Like, why did that happen? And then if that's true, why isn't this true? It's one of the most beautiful post-movie dinner movies I've seen in a very long time, but it's also just excruciatingly awful. And so it's pretty low on this list, but it's low in a fun way. If you enjoy kind of hate watching a movie, I would really recommend this movie to you. It is bad in a way that is fully unexpected and welcomed, actually. So don't take its sub 90 ranking as necessarily a fault. It's actually a lot of fun to sit through and make fun of and watch. Thomas Vinterberg's Kursk is a really disappointing movie to me because I like Thomas Vinterberg. I think he's a really great filmmaker when he's on. I think The Hunt is a masterpiece. I think The Celebration is one of the best independent films of the 90s. It's one of the Dogma 95 films. I think Thomas Vinterberg has a lot to say as a filmmaker. He's particularly good at wringing excellent performances from his casts. But Kursk is not good. It is a film based on the true story of a Russian submarine that sank to the bottom of the ocean after an explosion, and the risks that the United Kingdom takes in order to attempt to save these men. And so it's this tale of survival between these men who are trapped in the submarine and this sort of bureaucratic nightmare that's going on between Russia and the United Kingdom and the women whose spouses are at the bottom of the ocean. And it's a story that is really perfect for a movie. It is perfect for dramatization, and the actual events of the film are, I think, interesting and definitely worthy of being represented through filmmaking. But it is not good for some reason. Like the movie seems to focus on all the wrong things. It doesn't seem to understand the inherent drama between the people in the different aspects of the movie. Like, it doesn't really seem to understand the interpersonal drama of the men in the sub. It doesn't seem to understand the political, bureaucratic red tape associated with the intergovernmental communication. It doesn't really spend much time at all with the women who are left behind in Russia. And so what you get is a lot of like basically short films that are not particularly good or compelling because none of them have enough time given to them. It's almost like there is a much longer version of this film somewhere that is missing, because there are some, interesting performances that come out. But for the most part, the movie seems to be this weird, abridged, truncated version of a genuinely compelling and interesting story that happened. Another kind of interesting decision is that the script for this film and ultimately the portrayal of what happened in this film is not necessarily accurate historically. And so the actual story is, when I looked it up and read all about it, the actual story is much more interesting and compelling and dramatic than what we got in the movie. And some aspects were changed for the movie that actually made the stakes lower and made the emotional fallout much less potent. And so I'm not sure what happened behind the scenes to make that the case. I watched this on Mubi. It was pretty good, I guess, but it doesn't really deliver on any of its promises. I mean, it's like competently made and things like that, but I don't know. I expected more from Thomas Vinterberg. I expected more from this story, and honestly, I think the people who died in the sub deserve to have a better dramatized version of what happened to them, because I think leaving out some of those historical details is actually disrespectful to their surviving family members, and it's disrespectful to the bureaucratic nightmare that they went through in order to try and find help for them. So number 93 is a movie called I Wouldn't Be in Your Shoes, and it was made in 1948, and I found it on the Criterion Channel's Holiday Noir collection. And this is a very silly movie where a man, in order to silence some cats, throws his shoes out of his window, and then the next day goes to claim his shoes and can't find them. And then he's like set up for murder because his footprints are in the mud outside. And there's this scene where the police find the footprint in the mud, and then the scientists do, like a test on the footprint, and then they're able to surmise like this guy's exact height and weight and build and like facial features. And that's maybe the hardest I've ever I laughed watching a movie this year. But it's like an hour and 5 minutes, and it still feels like 40 minutes too long. It's basically like an extended episode of Columbo without Columbo. Pretty awful, but also like kind of charming. It's made during the Hays Code. The husband and wife have different twin beds, that kind of thing. I expected more, but what I got was pretty funny. It's not so bad, Number 92 is maybe controversial. I don't know. I feel like people like this movie, but it is 2016's We Are the Flesh, directed by Emiliano Rocha Minter. And it is a Spanish language film about people who are like walking around in like an abandoned city, end up in this abandoned building, and then they become like intrinsically linked to this like megalomaniac cult leader type guy. I found this movie disturbing in a way that I don't enjoy. It was extraordinarily cynical about like humanity. There was like zero redemptive quality whatsoever to this movie, and not even in a way that is like thought provoking. It was just like very mean spirited. It's a movie that I think feels very serious about itself and very important about itself, but ultimately it doesn't really feel like it's saying anything. Argue with me in the comments if you want. I would love to hear someone else's perspective on this movie, but I just like found it mostly gross and sad, but not in a way that was particularly provocative in a way that I enjoy. I mean, I love like the films of Michael Haneke. I mean, I am definitely a person who is game for a dark film, but this felt dark in a way that was very meaningless and hollow, and I didn't love it. Number 91 is a sad one for me because I was really looking forward to this movie, but it is Bob Fosse's Sweet Charity, and I love Bob Fosse. I would say that All That Jazz is like in my top five films of all time. Cabaret is unbelievable. But for some reason, Sweet Charity just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I found Shirley MacLaine kind of annoying in this movie. Usually, I find her pretty charming, especially when she was in her like youthful weirdo period. But there's something aimless about Sweet Charity that is true for a lot of like Broadway shows, Broadway musicals. It almost has the same structure as like The Nutcracker, where like there's 30 to 40 minutes of plot, and then after that it's just like a series of dances. Not unlike the Stanley Donen, Gene Kelly films like An American in Paris, but without really a lot of the talent. And I think Bob Fosse is typically obviously quite good at choreography and dancing. And there are some good numbers in here. Big Spender is obviously really influential and interesting, but I mostly found Sweet Charity very long. It's like 2.5 hours, and it really doesn't earn that runtime for me. I don't know. I just found it to be a little blank. Even though there are elements that I like, we don't get a lot of the Bob Fosse, the good Bob Fosse stuff that he gets to later in his career. So I actually struggled with number 90. So number 90 is a movie that I actually quite liked, but it's also like not very good. So it's Massacre at Central High, which is a film that was I'm looking at my notes here, a film that was made in 1976, and it was directed by Renee Daalder. And I don't know, I wonder if I watched it again, I might like it even more. But it seems to be like before the slasher, like tide, the wave of slashers that came through after this, 1976. I mean, this is like pre-Halloween, but it seems to be deconstructing the slasher film, and I guess it's more of a reaction to like the Giallo films of Italy or something, because I don't know what else it would even be feeding off of, but it's a movie where like everything about it is very stupid, but it also feels like that's the point, that kind of thing. But this is the only slasher film that I've ever seen where the slasher villain uses explosives to kill people, and I mean that very literally. Like he explodes their bodies. It's a very bizarre movie, and I want to say that I liked it, but it's one of those things where it's like I like maybe 15 minutes of this hour-and-a-half movie, but those 15 minutes are like pretty spectacular. And it's also a movie where there are no parents, and I think that was like very much a creative choice by the filmmakers. But it's like a Charlie Brown situation where like none of the kids in this movie have parents. There are no adults in this movie, and so it's kind of like Lord of the Fliesy in a way, without necessarily drawing that much attention to it. So it's an interesting movie. It's directed by a woman, which is pretty rare for slashers, especially during this time. So I mean, there are interesting things about it, but ultimately, I just wish it was a little better. So number 89 is a concert film. It's Tripping with Niels Fromm. Niels Fromm is like one of my absolute favorite composers. He makes sort of like trip hop, ambient piano stuff, and this is just literally just a concert film of him performing one of his albums. And I really like it, but there's really not that much to it. Niels Fromm is wearing a silly hat in this film, so if you wanted to seek it out, I think it's on Mubi. Go there for the hat. He's wearing like a page boy hat, but he's wearing it backwards. It's very cool. There is one really great sequence where the camera pans out to the audience, and it's just like a bunch of I would imagine Germans high on LSD, just like sort of like vibing with the Tripping with Niels Fromm album. It's good, but I mean, there's nothing particularly remarkable about it. So this is another Hammer film that I got from the Arrow box set. This is a film called The Full Treatment. It was made in 1960, and this is a film where it's clearly based on a novel that was much longer, and so it has these very ambitious ideas about like mental health and memory and like war trauma and marriage and relationships, but ultimately it's just like a 80-minute movie about a murder. And so it's one of these, there's a lot of these Hammer films that have these like high ambitions, and they're based on usually some piece of literature, but the film itself had to be 80 minutes because it was a B picture, like in a double bill. And so we end up with these movies that are like in a hurry, but also like very lackadaisical in their approach to the material. And so it is both like boring and too fast simultaneously. It has a really great opening sequence and a really great closing sequence, but like that middle hour just doesn't really do anything for me. So number 87 is actually a sad one for me. It is Patrick Wilson's directorial debut. It is Insidious: The Red Door, and that came out this past year. And while I think Patrick Wilson is actually a pretty good filmmaker, I mean, there are sequences in here that are very touching and tender. The problem is that it's an Insidious movie. It's like Insidious Part 4, and so it's like this. It's kind of a legacy sequel, and in some ways, maybe even a reboot of the franchise. But there's nothing about this movie that makes me feel like it had to be made, or like this story was even interesting to the people making it. The stuff with Patrick Wilson and his son are really interesting, and I think very well directed and well acted. But there's like also this like pretty mediocre horror movie happening around it, and I really loved the first Insidious movie, and I have some love in my heart for the second one, and the ones after that not so much. But I really had high hopes for The Red Door because it really felt like, you know, if this is someone's directorial debut and it's someone who has been in all these movies in the franchise, it really feels like something that he would feel like he needs to put a lot of effort into. He probably did, but this movie was not for me. And I really wish it was, because it really, I was excited to see this movie, and I was disappointed by what we ultimately got. Number 86 is a film that was made in 2006 called Tell No One, which is a French language thriller about a guy who is like double crossed and then triple crossed. It's one of those movies where for the first hour you're like, I mean, this is amazing. It's a very like 90s style, almost like Double Jeopardy style thriller that you would, you know, Ashley Judd would be in, or Morgan Freeman would be in, or something from the 90s. And in a way, it feels very much like a throwback to the movies you would have seen like on a Sunday afternoon on TNT or something, but French. And the main character, who is French Dustin Hoffman in my mind, is really compelling. He's like not a very good person. He's definitely like corrupt and a cheater and a liar, which makes him kind of a compelling protagonist in the sense that he is like framed for murder and then he has to undo all of that, but no one really believes him because he's like kind of a bad person. I like all of that. The problem is that it's one of those movies where like every 30 minutes there's a big twist, and the big twist upends everything the characters have done for the last 30 minutes. And so there is like eventually a diminishing of returns where like for the last hour you're just kind of like numbly watching this movie where you're like, okay, well obviously none of this is true, and then it's not, and then all of that happens and then none of that is true either. So I feel like it does the switch maybe too many times for my liking. But I mean, it's fine. It's kind of a tight thriller. It's I think it's a kind of an interesting play on structure. It's sort of like a bad Park Chan Wook film where there's a number of twists, but I feel like the filmmaking and the writing don't really sustain or scaffold all of the ideas that are in the movie. Number 85. Number 85 is Megan, or M3GAN. I really liked this movie, actually. I would say that everything from here on out is a movie that I at least generally liked. Megan is a movie it's a movie you've seen before. It's definitely a play on several different kinds of movie. Child's Play. It's kind of a take on Frankenstein. I mean, there's a number of references you could make regarding this movie, but I really liked the sort of like the movie seems to understand its assignment. The movie seems to understand its place in the culture. It's not really trying to be anything that it isn't. I do wish there was more of the kind of gonzo stuff that the advertising led you to believe, where like she's like dancing. I mean, that's like one moment in the movie. I do wish that was kind of throughout the movie, that Megan was getting increasingly stranger. But yeah, I mean, I had fun with this movie. I just there's nothing like particularly remarkable about it, but I also had a good time watching it. So there's that. Number 84. Number 84 is a movie that I was like kind of looking forward to. I don't really know why, because I don't really vibe with this director outside of one movie he made, maybe two. And it is Roland Emmerich's Moonfall, which came out, I think, last year. So Moonfall, it also starring Patrick Wilson, who I think appears several times on this list. But Moonfall is one of the most over produced movies I've ever watched. And what I mean by that is I feel like every single scene is in front of a green screen, to the point where, and I know it was made during COVID, and so I think that there's a lot of the none of these actors are ever actually meeting each other kind of vibes to it, like those behind the scenes videos of Spider-Man No Way Home, where like, it seems like none of the actors actually were in the same room together. It feels a little bit like that, but there's one sequence in particular where Patrick Wilson like walks into a room, and you can tell that the background outside of the room is green screen, the room is green screen, and all of the other people seem to be in different locations entirely or filming at different times. And really every scene feels that way, but it's particularly this one. It's an early scene where he goes to like teach a class at the like observatory in Los Angeles, but every scene feels that disconnected. And the cast is really interesting. The premise is appropriately very stupid. And I typically can at least tolerate like a Roland Emmerich, disaster film, but they definitely have diminishing returns. But this movie has like no sense of pacing, and I think that really kills this movie. And I think probably a lot of the pacing issues are due to the fact that none of the actors are ever in the same room, and everything is green screen. And so there is this like sheen of production to it that is like not that different from like the Blue Dabadi video from Eiffel 65. It kind of has that vibe, and not in a good way. It feels very fake, and I kind of hated it. So number 83 kind of pains me. It is Rainer Werner Fassbinder's Katzelmacher. And the reason that it pains me is because Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who will show up again on this list, is really one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. But this is one of his earlier films, maybe his first. It's definitely one of his first films. And it is so self-consciously like artistic and serious. And it has like no message. I mean, he's like 23 when he makes this movie. So I don't even know if he has that much to say as an artist at that point. But the movie is so self-conscious. Everyone is like posing, and the black and white photography is very picturesque, but in a way that feels like sort of a 17-year-old's Instagram. Fassbinder would go on to become one of the great masters of cinema. This is not where he would do that. Number 82 is, I'm hot and cold on this filmmaker, but is Lars von Trier's The Idiots, which is actually a movie I've been trying to get my hands on for 15 years at this point. It's actually very hard to find, and Mubi was posted it a few months ago in a restoration. It was a 4K restoration of The Idiots, which is a Dogma 95 film, and I think the only true Dogma 95 film, although I guess there are no true Dogma 95 films, but the closest that Lars von Trier ever got to doing a true Dogma 95 film. And I found this movie very annoying. It is sandwiched between two of my favorite Lars von Trier films. It's between Breaking the Waves, which I love, and Dancer in the Dark, which I also love. And so I've been trying to get my hands on this movie for a long time, but it is just an excruciating experience to get through. And I typically am a Lars von Trier apologist in terms of his work. And this movie just it didn't help my arguments any. It felt very mean-spirited. It felt like the whole thing was a joke, and not in a way that I found particularly pleasant. So it was a kind of a painful experience to get through. Luckily, I watched The Kingdom right after the first two seasons of The Kingdom, which lifted me right back up into Team Trier. So number 81 is a movie I like. It's Train to Busan. And I thought it was really solidly directed. I thought the action was really good. I thought the kind of zombies as hive mind was a really cool idea that I guess it's also explored in World War Z, although I think Train to Busan does it more interestingly. I think that the plotting is really good. I think the characterization is really good. For whatever reason, I didn't absolutely love it. I didn't fall on the floor. But it was definitely a super solid action zombie movie. I recommend it. Number 80 is Lukas Moodysson's Show Me Love, which, and again, most of these movies from here on out are movies I liked. So Show Me Love, which has an alternate title that I can't say, but is the first film by Lukas Moodysson. And he is a Swedish filmmaker who, in his early career, he's had a really interesting kind of run of movies, but his first few movies are kind of John Cassavetes like slice of life, very documentary-esque films, and Show Me Love is him kind of dipping his toes into that style. And it is, I guess, a queer romance, but it's also mostly just a movie about what it's like to be young and to feel like the entire world is against you and to feel like your hometown is to blame. And it is a movie with really uncomfortable sequences because they feel so familiar to anyone who's ever been a teenager. And I really liked this movie. The following Lukas Moodysson film I liked much better, but I think this is a very excellent effort. And the Arrow box set of his work is really exceptional. So if you are interested in John Cassavetes-esque filmmaking, at least for his first couple films, I very, very highly recommend watching Show Me Love or his later films. All right, so I feel like I need to speed up because I'm taking a really long time on each of these, and I have like 80 more movies to go. So, so number 79 is The Snorkel. The Snorkel is also a Hammer film. It is one of my favorite Hammer films. It is, again, kind of like a Columbo situation where you see a murder happen, you see how it was done, and then the movie is figuring out how the detective will figure out how the murder occurred, and it uses a snorkel in an interesting, fun way. Number 78 is The Dungeon Master, which is from the Empire video box set that Arrow released this year. And Dungeon Master is an anthology film. There's 5 or 6 short films, all based around this guy who creates this computer program that gives you a simulation of a D&D campaign, I guess. It is really silly. Every film is directed by someone else who would go on to direct one of the full feature-length films for Empire Pictures. And it, So for that reason, some are better than others, but it's a fun movie. Number 77 is Cash on Demand. This is a film that stars Peter Cushing, Grand Moff Tarkin from A New Hope, and I guess Rogue One, even though he was dead. And he plays like a very snooty bank manager in Britain. This is also a Hammer film, and this man comes in and performs like the perfect heist. And I gotta say, I really liked this movie. It is a very tight, like 65-minute B picture, and not a second is wasted. It is genuinely a very good heist. This guy should congratulate himself for committing a perfect heist. I very highly recommend this. So if you are interested in getting into the Hammer films, if you are interested in like 50s and 60s crime cinema, this is a really great place to start. I actually like fully loved this movie. Number 76 is Talk to Me. This was a pretty hyped movie. It's an A24 release, made in Australia. I remember the advertising was basically comparing it to other great horror films from the A24 production company, distribution company, and I was I was left pretty cold by it. I think that the it wears its metaphor on its sleeve in a way that is kind of annoying. I think that there are like two or three really solid, really scary sequences, but I feel like there's not enough there for a full film. I think the performances are pretty good. I think the filmmaking is pretty good, but for some reason, the movie just didn't really speak to me on any level other than like a couple of visceral sequences. I'm really just thinking of one sequence that is genuinely shocking and violent and scary, but the film as a whole didn't really do a lot for me, which was disappointing. Number 75 is William Friedkin's To Live and Die in Los Angeles. I think that if I watched this movie again, it would shoot way up further on this list. I may have just been like tired or something when I watched it. It has, I mean, really, it's a movie that exists because of like two really bravura sequences. And after William Friedkin passed, the 4K of this film came out right around the same time, and I kind of blind bought it just because I was feeling very sad that William Friedkin had passed. And when I watched it, I remember thinking that it was kind of an odd film for William Friedkin to have made at that time. I know that he did not want to really be known as the French Connection guy anymore. He didn't really want to be known as the Exorcist guy anymore. He was in this post Sorcerer sadness. Sorcerer, full masterpiece, beautiful, fantastic, amazing film. And I think that he was really bummed out that Sorcerer did not do better, because I think that he definitely believed it was a better film than the ones he was famous for. To Live and Die in LA feels a lot like him trying to make a populist film that would become another French Connection. I think William Peterson is a weird choice for your protagonist in that case. I don't really get the love for him. He's not particularly good, in my opinion. I also don't love him in not Red Dragon, Manhunter. So anyway, I think that I think that To Live and Die in LA is two amazing sequences. One of them being a car chase where it's almost like Friedkin trying to one up himself from the French Connection car chase, and the scene where Willem Dafoe is printing money is like intoxicating. I really love watching people who are good at their jobs do their jobs. And so I think that sequence is like really unbelievable. And apparently, it was so realistic that the Fed got involved in the process. Number 74 is Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part One. I wanted to love this movie, but I just liked it. I love the Mission Impossible franchise. I think Mission Impossible Fallout, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, I think those are exceptional action movies, some of the best action movies that we've had in decades. And so my hopes were very, very high for Dead Reckoning Part 1. And I think there are good things in this movie, but I was definitely disappointed on the heels of Fallout, which I think is just like one of the tightest, most exceptional action films ever made. And Dead Reckoning is not. Ultimately, I feel like the last third of the movie is just like someone played Uncharted 2 and they were like, we should do that. But anyway, we'll see what part two holds. Number 73 is the Super Mario Brothers movie, which I thought was fine. Number 72 is Greg Araki's The Doom Generation. This is another movie I've been trying to get my hands on for years, and I finally watched it. Mysterious Skin was a very important movie to me when I was a teenager, in my late teens especially. And I was really looking forward to seeing other Greg Araki films, and this one was pretty hard to get a hold of for a long time. The Criterion Channel actually released it, and I liked it, but I also found it very annoying. I found it very annoying, and I think it's supposed to be annoying, and I think it's supposed to be gross. It's definitely a gross movie, as most of his movies are. But I think I'm too old. It feels like a movie that you're supposed to watch very transgressively as like a 16-year-old and be like, wow, I can't believe I'm watching this. But when you're in your mid 30s, it just feels a little annoying. And I wish it didn't. I wish I had seen it younger, but I feel like I just kind of missed the boat on that one. Number 71 is Evil Dead Rise, easily my least favorite Evil Dead movie. There are a couple of really cool scenes, but I think mostly it is a missed opportunity. I wish it was weirder. I wish it was grosser. I wish it went harder on the ability that this franchise has to just do kind of whatever it wants. I feel like this movie is weirdly tame for a franchise that has like predicated itself on every 5 minutes giving you something you have just never seen in a movie before. And I wish that there was more of that, or really any of that in this movie. It feels very safe. And that's disappointing. Number 70 is Three Monkeys. This is the first appearance of Neri Bilge Ceylan. He will show up like 4 more times in this list because I bought a box set and watched all of his films in like a week period and absolutely fell in love. This was my least favorite of those, but I think my least favorite Neri Bilge Ceylan film is still pretty good. Number 69 is 1974's Bob Fosse film Lenny. I think Dustin Hoffman is horrifically miscast in this movie. He seems to completely miss the point of what made Lenny Bruce an interesting person. The stand-up segments are bad, just straight up bad. And I think Bob Fosse knew that because in All That Jazz, he seems to be making fun of himself for making Lenny. There are a couple of really dynamite performances in Lenny, not by Dustin Hoffman. And I really like the black and white cinematography. I think the editing is characteristically pretty good for a Bob Fosse movie. But the central performance just is not there. But again, sort of like Neri Bilge Ceylan, a bad Bob Fosse film is still going to be pretty good. Number 68 is a movie I liked. It is Diary of a Mad Housewife, directed by Frank Perry. This is a film that I got through an Indicator sale, and it was one of those like buy two get one free things. It looked interesting. I got it. Diary of a Mad Housewife is very much a 70s drama in really every sense of the word, where these days I feel like it would be like a 10-part miniseries on HBO or something, but it's basically there's a lot of these in the 70s, like An Unmarried Woman by Paul Mazursky really comes to mind. Some Cassavetes work, but anyway, it's basically like the bored woman thing. It's like a Madame Bovary type thing, or The Awakening by Kate Chopin. A woman is bored by her life. Her husband is not great, so she seeks out someone else to fulfill that. Drama unfolds. As far as that goes, this is pretty good. Also, Frank Langella is in this movie, and he's very hot in this. And I did not know that he had a hot period. So good for him. Number 67, which maybe this is low. I'm thinking this is low. But The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant by Rainer Werner Fassbinder. This is good Fassbinder. So it is a film that takes place pretty much entirely in one room, and it's really like a one-woman show where sometimes a supporting cast member will come in and talk to her. But this is really a one-woman show, and this is a beautiful, fantastic film. The cinematography is excellent. It is amazing how much Fassbinder is able to do just in this one room. And I think that this is one of those times where you realize how brilliant of a writer Fassbinder is. He worked so well with the limitations of his situation, with the low budgets, with his very small troupe of actors that he just kept churning these movies out with. And he apparently wrote, I mean, whatever, it's apocryphal, I suppose, but he apparently wrote this entire film on one plane ride, and he was very prolific in his fairly short life. And so I do believe that he wrote this quickly, but the idea of him sitting down and just writing this out and then filming it exactly as written is like crazy and impressive, because this movie is is really emotionally deep and profound. I love this movie, and I hope you watch it. If you're interested in Fassbender, this is a good one. Number 56 is Stuart Gordon's From Beyond. This is made after Reanimator, and Stuart Gordon thought, what if grosser? And so Reanimator, famously gross movie. From Beyond, grosser. So just think of all of the gore effects and the Beckler effects, you know, that became popular for Empire Pictures and later Half Moon Pictures. But the last 30 minutes of From Beyond is unbelievable. So you do have to kind of like endure the first hour, but once you get to the effects section, not unlike Brian Usnia's Society, it is one of those movies where it is worth the wait. Just wait it out. This is a crazy movie, and you will enjoy it if you are interested in kind of Gonzo horror, especially 80s Gonzo horror. It is really spectacular. Number 65 is Nuri Bilge Ceylan's The Small Town. It's his debut film. It is really stylistically very different from his other films. Not a lot of dialogue. It's really short, which is obviously uncommon for Ceylan. But it is about a small Turkish town. I think it's the town where Ceylan grew up. A lot of the actors are family members of Ceylan. So it is very much like a student film, almost very low budget. I think he paid for it mostly himself out of pocket. I think his parents helped him pay for it. It is a really great slice of life movie that is almost documentary style. I believe most of the movie was improvised. It really feels like a time capsule of a place and a document of what his life was like growing up. And I'm not from Turkey. I've never been to Turkey, and so I'm not very familiar with Turkish culture. And so for me, it was really illuminating to see what people live, how people live in that time and in that place. And so really, I found it completely enthralling in that sense. And it reminded me a lot of The Tree of Wooden Clogs, which is a similar style of movie where it feels like half documentary, half narrative feature film, where you basically just see like how people live in this place that has a really harsh climate and where living is just difficult. And I find movies like that really, really profound and interesting, and I'm very much drawn to them. And so it is not as good as The Tree of Wooden Clogs. I think Tree of Wooden Clogs is like one of the greatest films ever made, but this is pretty good. Number 64 is Les Samurai by Jean-Pierre Melville. This movie feels like the beta test for like every cool guy movie like ever made. Like I mean, it's about like the coolest dude who ever lived. I would say that Jim Jarmusch's Ghost Dog: Way of the Samurai is very clearly inspired by this film, almost to the point where like you could classify it as a remake. But the Nicholas Winding Refn, Ryan Gosling film Drive, I think, is also very much in the vein of Les Samurai. Even like the first John Wick feels close to this. David Fincher's The Killer feels very much inspired by this film. So I think that if you are interested in like hitman movies where the main character is like unknowable and cool and every sequence just feels designed to like release serotonin and dopamine, that I Jean-Pierre Melville's Les Samurai is just like one of the most like awesome cool movies ever made. I have no idea how else to describe this movie. It is just very stylish in a way that's super pleasing. Number 63 is Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Climates, which stars himself and his wife. It feels a lot like Ceylan's take on something like Before Sunset or Before Midnight, closer to Before Midnight in tone, where a married couple is kind of on the rocks. They're on a road trip. They are arguing and having these long conversations. And I think this is a turning point for Ceylon's career in the sense that his movies stop being essentially Andrei Tarkovsky ripoff type movies. And I mean that as a compliment, really, and start turning into Nuri Bilge Ceylan films. The conversations become longer, the dialogue becomes more important. I feel like before this film in his filmography, his movies are mostly like visually very interesting, very contemplative, very Terrence Malick esque. Whereas the further into his filmography you go, the more it becomes almost like a Dostoevsky or a Tolstoy, where it is really about these conversations that characters are having. Whereas before that, it feels much more like we are investigating a space and the sort of ephemeral natural qualities of spaces. Number 62 is a made-for-TV movie called The People Next Door, and I loved this movie. It is very much like one of those after-school special cautionary tale. This is what your kids are doing when they're on drugs, that kind of thing. But I found it ultra compelling. It is like the perfect example of an after-school special type movie done well, where it has like a realistic arc to it. The drug use and what it does to the family and the rehab, all of that just feels very real. I have like personal experience with this kind of thing, and it just felt extremely accurate. It felt like it actually had a lot of profound things to say about, you know, parenting and the responsibilities of being a parent and the confusion and despair that comes with not knowing how to help your child. I think all of that is done very, very well. Number 61 is a really great South Korean horror film. I guess it's more of like maybe it's an action thriller it's called Dog Bites Dog. And it is like a truly delightful movie where people just keep enacting revenge on each other over and over again, and the stakes get higher and higher. It's a lot like the film I Saw the Devil, which is also a South Korean film. But it is a situation where like there's a serial killer who kidnaps this woman, but it turns out her husband is like an agent, like a special agent for some like government, agency, and he has like all of these important, interesting skills, and he can apply them, sort of like Liam Neeson in any movie in the last 15 years. But the stakes get increasingly higher as the film goes, and to the point where it becomes very funny. And I thought this movie was a lot of fun. Number 60 is Ruben Östlund's Triangle of Sadness, which is a movie that I equally liked and did not like, which is true for maybe every Ruben Östlund film I've watched so far. It is a movie that has a very funny premise and a lot of really funny sequences, but at 2.5 hours, it just really overstays its welcome. And I think maybe if I watched it as like three semi-separate short films, I would like it more. But what I got is not that. And really, the first major sequence is, in my opinion, the best of the sequences. And so I think that also harms the movie. But it's fun. I mean, it's definitely a very obvious metaphor for a lot of things, which is also true of Ruben Östlund. I might just not vibe with Ruben Östlund very much, but I think Triangle of Sadness is well made. I think the acting is really good. I think the comedy is genuinely funny, but it sometimes feels like it's about an hour too long, which, your mileage may vary on that. Number 59, 20,000 Days on Earth. It is a Nick Cave film. Oh my gosh. It's a Nick Cave film. It is part documentary, part narrative feature, I guess. It's kind of unlike any movie I've ever seen, but it centers on Nick Cave as a myth, and it is part of this, in my mind, of this trilogy of documentaries that strip away the mythology that Cave has created about himself. And so this first film in this trilogy, 20,000 Days on Earth, is, I think, the strongest effort in sort of crystallizing what makes Nick Cave interesting as performer, like as cultural artifact. And so it really encapsulates the mystery and the provocative and the strange cultural place that Nick Cave has for certain people. And I think that this movie really captures why I fell in love with him as a performer. And I think that this movie really understands why somebody would enjoy Nick Cave. I don't know. It's a great testament to what he is as a celebrity, and I really like that about this film. Number 58, the unbearable weight of massive talent. I like Nicolas Cage. I think Nicolas Cage is a lot of fun. I read the book about him last year, The Age of Cage. I I think that this movie plays pretty well into what makes Nicolas Cage a fascinating cultural figure, and I had fun with it. I like Pedro Pascal. I think it's a fun movie. It's not great, but I think it's pretty fun. Number 57 is EO by Jerzy Skolominski. I practiced that. So this is a film about a donkey. It feels very much inspired by Oh Hassard Balthazar by way of Tron or something. It's one of those movies where the original score far, in my opinion, far outweighs the film itself. It's one of those things where like the soundtrack just adds 2 full stars to the film. I think it's good. I prefer Bresson's approach to A Donkey's Life. I think EO is very much going for it, which I appreciate. I enjoy that kind of ambition in a film. I enjoy the kind of electric creativity in the approach to this film. But it didn't hit me the way that I wanted it to, and I read a lot about it. I had heard a lot about it before I actually ended up being able to see it. I think Criterion Channel was the premiere of it on streaming, and I liked it. But the soundtrack is really where it's at for me. The soundtrack is like my favorite of the year. It is unbelievable. The movie itself is fine. Number 56 is the Safdie brothers film Daddy Longlegs, about maybe just America's worst father. It's about like a negligent, anxiety-ridden, horrible, selfish man who has these children that he sees like once a month, and he's a horrible dad, and that's really the movie. It is definitely a precursor to the later, better Safdie films. It is similar to Good Time in the sense that like the whole movie takes place outside on the streets, but it is very similar to Uncut Gems in the sense that it is about a person who is just a bad person and makes consistently terrible choices, and his life is always in shambles because of him specifically. The Safdies are particularly good at this. There is never a dull moment in this movie, but I could not help comparing it to their later, better movies. Number 55 is Scream 6. I have very little to say about this movie. I just think Dermot Mulroney is very funny in it, and I was delighted by him. Number 54 is The Heroic Trio by Johnny To. If you were going to watch one movie from this list with a crowd of people, like if you were going to pick a movie to watch with 5 or more people, please watch it. Go in blind. Learn nothing about it. It is one of the most, it's like watching Hausu or something with a crowd, where it's like truly every couple of minutes, the least expected thing in the world will happen. And I promise you, everybody in the room will be laughing and having a great time. The Heroic Trio is truly one of the great watch this with a bunch of people movies. You will not be disappointed. Everyone will talk about it for the rest of the night. Go in blind. Heroic Trio. Please just watch it. Another Johnny To movie. This one is number 53 is Election, not to be confused with Alexander Payne's Election. I really like Johnny To. Johnny To, particularly prolific filmmaker from Hong Kong, who has made a ton of really great movies. I really like Election. It is very much like a Johnny To version of something like The Godfather, where he is trying to make like the ultimate mafia film. There's a lot of yelling in this movie. It's not quite as subtle as The Godfather is, but I very highly recommend this movie. It is a lot of fun. It goes in a lot of crazy directions. There is a sequel. I don't think I've seen the sequel, but if you are interested in mob movies, specifically mob movies about like the changing of the guard, this is maybe one of the best ones. It is really quite something. Number 52 is Park Chan-wook's Joint Security Area. This is a film about the border between North and South Korea and just a couple of friends being dudes. It is like an hour of just guys being dudes, playing games, comparing snacks, peeing outside, all of that. It is not quite as formally ambitious. I mean, it does have like the weird structuring, storytelling that Park Chan Wook is pretty famous for at this point. It is an early film for him. It was a giant hit in Korea, like a giant hit, and I can see why. It very much feels like a movie that like would very similar to like the films of Danny Boyle, I would say, cause a stir just because of how it's made and the interesting structure of it. But I wanted to love this movie, but I just liked it, and that's fine. I liked it a lot. I think it is funny and I think really interesting. It kind of loses me in the last like 30 minutes because I feel like the movie begins as one thing and ends as something else, but the thing it begins as is a mystery, and the thing that it ends as is not a mystery, and so that was hard for me to adjust to. But I think that's on me. Number 51 was a real surprise for me. So Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves is maybe the best Indiana Jones movie of the last I don't know 40 years. So Dungeons, I had no expectations for this movie going in. I liked Game Night, which is also directed by John Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein. And I think that Game Night captures the kind of like David Fincher aesthetic really well. Like they're very good at imitating styles. But Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, the title alone, it's really long. I do like Chris Pine. I like Michelle Rodriguez. It made sense, you know, that it would be good. But for some reason, I had no expectations whatsoever going into it. Within 10 minutes, I was like, this movie rules. I love this movie. It is a classic, sincere, very earnest adventure movie. And we don't really get those anymore. And I hope we get 10 of these. I love the characters. I love the pacing. I think that they have a lot of fun with the lore, the mythology, the monsters. It's funny, but it never feels like it's making fun of what it is. It never feels ashamed of being a Dungeons and Dragons movie. It just is inherently funny. I want a whole franchise of this. I hope it did well. I didn't even look because I was like nervous that it made $10 or something. But I thought the effects were good. Really, just it was a lot of fun. I recommend it to anyone who loves adventure movies. It was really really good. Number 50. So we're halfway there. We're halfway. Stuart Gordon's Dolls. Now, this is also a part of the Empire Pictures line of straight to VHS movies. I remember seeing the cover of this movie every time I went to Blockbuster in the mid to late 90s. And I remember being really terrified of that poster. Stuart Gordon typically makes like kind of gross movies. He's the Reanimator guy. He made From Beyond, which was also on this list. This movie is a little more classy, dare I say, than the other two films, but it's still an Empire Pictures joint. And all the better for it. It is a very weird amalgam of things. There are these two hitchhiker girls that are like Madonna eras. They're like two different Madonna eras. There is a family, there's a weird kid, there's a man who makes porcelain dolls. Obviously, the porcelain dolls come to life. We get the Beckler magic in terms of the special effects. There's a lot of like really fascinating creative kills in this movie. It's very schlocky, but in a way that pleases me. So I actually very much recommend Dolls by Stuart Gordon. I think you guys would enjoy it. Number 49 also comes from the Criterion Channel's holiday noir series. It is called Blast of Silence. It is an extremely low budget noir film that the main character is actually played by the director of the movie. Originally, he wanted Columbo himself to play the lead, but it turns out Alan Barron had to do it. This is a weird movie because the voiceover is performed not by the main character, and well, it's performed by the main character, but like it's a different voice than the actor, and so we get this. Also, the voiceover was written by a different guy, and so it is this extremely strange film in which the voiceover feels like it's for a different thing entirely. It feels a lot like Les Samurai, just not as stylistically interesting. And the I cannot stress enough how low budget this is. I think it cost maybe 20 grand in a time where 20 grand could barely get you the film that this was made on. And it is very loosely paced, but there are some moments in this movie that really feel like magic. And there's particularly this one sequence that involves this very soft spoken, lovely man who is also an arms dealer for this hitman. It's really wonderful. I mean, it's a wonderful performance. It's a really amazing depiction of a person high on heroin. This movie is it feels like it shouldn't exist. It just really feels very raw and handmade in a way that you just wouldn't expect from a film that was shot in the 60s. And I love it. I love it for that. Number 48 is King Hugh's Dragon Inn. This is a very silly movie. It is a film where we have a lot of wire work, we have a lot of fun weapons, we have a lot of great choreographed fight scenes. The tone is very silly, and of course, it is the film featured in Goodbye Dragon Inn. But I did not expect the tone of this film to be as silly as it is. But I really loved it, and it's very short. And I think that if you are interested in the like wire fu that was repopularized by Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, this movie feels very much a like a tentpole example of exactly that style, but in a way that's very goofy and funny. Number 47 is Shallow Grave. I have mixed feelings about this film. I tend to like Danny Boyle, but I don't always like Danny Boyle. I think Christopher Eccleston is very good in this movie. I think Ewan McGregor is very hot in this movie. He's like long hair Ewan. This is pre-Train Spotting. I'm pretty sure it's Danny Boyle's first film. It is very much like a moralistic cautionary tale, kind of semi-inspired by one of the Canterbury Tales. It has a very strange second act, and I really love the last like 10-15 minutes of this movie. I think it's extremely compelling. I do think it kind of hangs a little bit loose, and it feels kind of flabby compared to Danny Boyle's much stronger later efforts. But I think this is an interesting movie, and I think specifically it is interesting in that it is very much a time capsule of Scotland during this time. I wonder if people from Scotland watch this movie very nostalgically, just because it feels like it really encapsulates like early '90s aesthetics from that period. And I know that Danny Boyle was kind of like on the bleeding edge of cool there for a while. So I wonder really if there had ever been a movie made like this in Scotland until this point. So it is very interesting in that regard. And Ewan is very hot in this movie. So if you're a Ewan fan, this is maybe the peak of that. Number 46 is the Howard Hawks film Red River, an extraordinary movie. I think the further I get from it after watching it, the more it raises in esteem for me. I wish it was a little shorter. It does feel a little bit like those epics of the mid 20th century that just really luxuriate in certain sequences. But I think John Wayne is tremendous in this movie. I think Montgomery Clift is tremendous in this movie. It is really just a very classic, compelling Western story about the American dream and hubris and the conflict of trying to survive, but then also trying to thrive in places where maybe we shouldn't even be. It is an interesting movie that is based on a novel, and if you get the Criterion Collection box set thing for Red River, it actually comes with the novel, which is a really interesting feature that comes with that book. Number 45 is Sammo Hung's Dragons Forever. This is a Jackie Chan Sammo Hung joint. It is extremely silly. It is, I think, emblematic of the early period of Jackie Chan's stardom, where he was basically a Buster Keaton-esque comedic figure who was also good at martial arts. I think that it is common for people my age specifically to remember Jackie Chan as like the Rush Hour and Shanghai Noon guy, but when you go back further into his career, when you go back to his Hong Kong roots, you see someone who was very much a comedic actor first and a martial artist second. Not to belittle at all his abilities as a martial artist, but he is very much a storyteller and a comedian. And then the action kind of comes secondary to that. That changes over the course of his career. Even in Hong Kong, that changes. But really, that early stuff, it is not so much his athleticism or his virtuosic acrobatics. It is really his ability to convey comedy physically. And Dragons Forever, I think, very much gives us that. It is an extremely silly movie, and I had a great time watching it. Number 44 is Cellar Dweller. This is another of the Empire Pictures films that came out in the Arrow Empire Pictures box set. And I had an absolute blast with this movie. It has this long opening sequence that takes place just 30 years ago, whenever that could be, starring Jeffrey Combs of Reanimator fame. And it is about a comic book artist who works on a comic called Cellar Dweller. And he is using for reference like a book of satanic worship or something. And if you draw the creature in this book, it comes to life and terrorizes everyone in the house. It is a movie that makes fun of avant-garde artists and upholds the comic book artist as, you know, the reigning champion of art, which of course it does. But this movie is a ton of fun. I'm probably going to watch it again sometime this week. I really, really liked it. It is so schlocky and sleazy and silly. It is like a tight 70 minutes, just a joy. It is absolute joy to watch this movie. Number 43 is Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Clouds of May. I really love this movie. It feels a lot like a kind of like a remake of The Small Town, but it's also a movie about making his first feature film. His father is basically the protagonist of this movie. Nuri Bilge Ceylan's like real father is the protagonist of this film. And it is about a young filmmaker photographing his parents for a movie that he is making for film school. And so we get kind of both sides of what it was like to make his first feature film. We get a lot of the footage kind of reused and recycled from his first film, but then we also get the complex relationship he has with his own hometown. And so we get this examination of kind of this exploitation that he's performing of the poverty of his hometown, and he's attempting to tell a story that is untrue about his hometown using the people that he grew up with. And so he's asking his parents to do these things that they've never done in order to portray some kind of truth that he thinks is very valuable. All the while, everyone that he is using keeps reminding him over and over again, this is not true. This is an untrue portrayal of how you grew up. And so it really examines the nature of the artist and the truth. Something that Ceylan will return to again and again throughout his career. But I think that it really crystallizes in this movie and is brilliantly portrayed. It is such a condemnation of his younger self, the hubris of the young artist, and the idea that you know better than everyone else because you have a camera and you feel like you have something to say. It is really a brilliantly done film. Number 42 is It's Always Fair Weather, starring Gene Kelly. This is a Stanley Donen Gene Kelly joint. Probably the peak of Gene Kelly's powers in Hollywood. Of course, kind of paradoxically, the beginning of the fall. But this is maybe the highest budget and lowest stakes film ever made. But it is about these three men who come back from the war. It was actually conceived as a sequel to On the Town, an earlier Gene Kelly film. These three men come back from the war and they say, like, in 10 years, let's meet back at this bar and kind of see, where our friendship is following those 10 years and catch up. They do that, and it turns out that all three of these men are very, very different. They lead very different lives. Gene Kelly plays kind of a cad, gambling addict, boxing agent, dirtbag, which is great for Gene Kelly. There are 4 dance sequences in this movie that are mind-blowing. The first dance sequence of the film involves these 3 men with like metal trash can lids on their left feet, and they're dancing and tap dancing with these trash cans. There's a really wonderful dance scene in a boxing arena starring Sid Charisse in this wonderful green dress, and she is absolutely mesmerizing in that role. And then we also have a sequence where Gene Kelly tap dances in roller skates that is like the most transcendent thing I've seen in a musical in many years. Other than that, the movie is fine, but those sequences in particular are unbelievable and fully worth the price of admission. Number 41. Number 41 is A Touch of Zen, also by King Hu, an extraordinary movie. This is a kung fu epic in every sense of the word. It is a sprawling film about this town that is under attack, and the people who live in the town essentially home aloning the the usurpers. It is the last hour of this movie is unbelievable. I absolutely loved this film. I think that the filmmaking is impeccable. The music is unbelievable. The action is really, really vivid and visceral and compelling. It is a film that has like maybe a perfect final hour. Just the final act is so transcendently wonderful, and I love all the traps that they create. I love the message of the film. Really, everything about this movie is just fantastic, and I cannot recommend it enough. If you are interested in Hong Kong cinema from the 60s and 70s, I cannot recommend A Touch of Zen anymore. It is unbelievable. Number 40 is Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir Part 1. Part 2 will appear later in this video. The Souvenir Part 1 is a film that is so hauntingly sad, and it feels like a movie just completely steeped in grief. It follows a woman played by Honor Swinton Byrne, who is Tilda Swinton's daughter. It follows a young filmmaker who is in film school and is in this relationship with a man who is very disturbed and who is really emotionally unstable. And the movie follows as this person kind of slowly discovers the darkness in this man that she has really let kind of infest her life as if he's like a viral contagion. And this film really investigates the longing we have to have a partner and our inability to protect ourselves from the things we love. And this movie feels like just a haunted, ghostly thing. And it is so delicate and so beautiful. And Joanna Hogg, who I would say famously has kind of like these slow burn films, really is at the peak of her powers here in terms of camera placement, how she just lets scenes linger for long periods of time. The performances are mesmerizing, absolutely fantastic performances. And the sequel, The Souvenir Part 2, which will appear later, really just takes those qualities and runs with them. Number 39 is Dennis Hopper's Out of the Blue. I made a video essay about this film earlier this year. It is one of the saddest movies I've ever seen. It is a film that is really just shocking in the things that it portrays for a young person. I think that if you are going to watch Out of the Blue, you need to be ready for one of the darkest films maybe you've ever seen. And I don't mean that in terms of even graphic depictions of things. It's really not a very graphic film or very visceral in any kind of way, but the plot and narrative developments, the characterization of the father and the daughter, the absolute desperation and hopelessness in the lives of these people is so oppressively dark that if you are not prepared, this film will just like consume you. And the first time I saw this film, I was absolutely wrecked. I had a very hard time recovering from this movie for a couple of days. It was just on my mind constantly. And I ended up watching it again because I couldn't get it out of my head. Number 38 is Ryuichi Sakamoto Async. This is a concert film based around his final album, Async. It is kind of like Tripping with Nils Fromm, just a filmed concert. And so there's nothing particularly important or special about the filmmaking itself, but Sakamoto is an artist that I hold very dear to my heart. He passed away in 2023, and he left behind just a staggering brilliance of work that is very, very rich. And Async is his swan song, a very ambient, unusual album, even unusual for his work. Is very haunted and quiet. And this performance really speaks to the power of his music. And I really love the setting. I love the close-ups of this film. I think Sakamoto's really locked in this performance. It's a really fantastic concert film, even though the filmmaking is not necessarily doing anything that interesting or strange. I really love this performance, and Sakamoto means so much to me that I had to include it on this list. It is number 38. Number 37 is Robert Altman's Buffalo. I want to get this title right. Buffalo Bill and the Indians, comma, or Sitting Bull's History Lesson, which is his follow-up to Nashville. Nashville is probably in my top 5 movies of all time. I've seen it probably over a dozen times, but Buffalo Bill eluded me for many years. I finally got a copy of it, and I couldn't get over how modern this movie felt. It's really about taking history and transforming history into whatever you politically need it to be. And so this film is really an investigation of how we as Americans in particular process our own history to make us always the good guys. And this kind of historical fiction that we tend to use throughout American history, it really comes to a point in this film. We have Buffalo Bill, who is played by Paul Newman, and just he's unbelievable in this. But Buffalo Bill, who is reenacting different battles, including his battle with Sitting Bull, but none of it is accurate. And he is using the real Sitting Bull and these people that he really fought in these battles to recreate them. But this rewriting of history is so obvious to everyone involved, but they're all just kind of along for the ride. And it is a movie that feels like it is only getting more and more accurate as to how we portray our own histories. And the further into the information age we go, if you Google something and you look for the answer you want, you will find it. And these reenactments, these recreations, this rewriting of history just feels so ripe for our current political climate that I was really just kind of like speechless by the end of the film. And it's also very funny. The tone is very strange. It is very much 70s Altman, and I mean that is the highest of compliments. I really love Robert Altman's work, and this film is absolutely fantastic. Number 36 is Kyle Edward Ball's Skinamarink. This is a film that I heard an awful lot about at the beginning of the year. It finally made it to Shudder. I watched it in the middle of the night one night, and it was very effective. I had the volume up very high, all the lights were off, and I was totally locked in. My phone was in a different room entirely. And it is very much like a slow cinema film, but it's also a film that feels like it could only exist like in the internet age. It very much feels like the peak of the sort of like scary YouTube video or the scary video you would find on Reddit or something. It feels like found footage, but found footage that you would see like in a viral video, not so much like a Blair Witch Project. And so it is a movie that is so grainy and so inscrutable. There aren't even like human faces in this movie. And most of the movie is just like corners of rooms and darkness. And the sound design is really atmospheric and nightmarish. It's a hard movie for me to recommend to someone, but if you are interested in horror film making that is maybe off the beaten path, if you are interested in vibe horror as opposed to scare horror, this is very much up your alley. Like We're All Going to the World's Fair, films like that, where there aren't any like specific scare scenes. It is more just like the vibes are atmospheric, and there's a lot of dread, but nothing really happens. So it's hard to recommend, but I think if you're looking for something like that, Skinamarink is really maybe the ultimate of that genre that I can think of. It is a very striking film, and I'm really interested to see what Kyle Edward Ball does following the success of Skinamarink. Going to the other end of the spectrum, number 35 is M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin, which I delighted in. I read Paul Tremblay's book, Cabin at the End of the World, a couple of years ago, and I really liked that book, and I think it was really scary and interesting, and I think that it uses the home invasion genre in a really interesting way, in a really unique and fresh way. And I am an M. Night Shyamalan apologist. I think that he had a kind of a fallow period there for several films, but I think Unbreakable is an absolute masterpiece. I love The Sixth Sense. I haven't liked Glass, which I think some people don't like. Split, I'm split on. But then his newer films, I enjoyed Old, even though the script is not maybe my favorite. But Knock at the Cabin, I think, really leans into M. Night Shyamalan's strengths, which is very unusual dialogue that I think is a choice. I think people find him to be a bad writer of dialogue, and I think that can be true. I mean, The Happening exists, but I think that his unique style of writing language really works for the kinds of movies he's trying to make. And I think that Knock at the Cabin in particular, and Dave Bautista's performance in particular, really illuminate what makes Shyamalan's aesthetic interesting and what makes his voice as a filmmaker unique and compelling, which is there is this otherworldly kind of uncanny thing going on with his films. And Knock at the Cabin is probably the best he has done that particular oblique style. I think that's the best example of that since Unbreakable. And that no one in this movie acts like a human person, and none of the events in this movie are reacted to in any way that feels legitimate or realistic. But because the whole movie is steeped in this very singular Shyamalan style, for some reason it works very, very well for me. I think that if you skipped this movie, you should really pay attention to it. It is a really interesting kind of lesson in what Shyamalan is very, very good at stylistically. And I think that the movie itself is kind of overwhelmingly sad and full of despair and anger. I think it's one of the angriest films that Shyamalan has ever made. In a way that I find very interesting, especially since Shyamalan now is at a stage in his life where like his children are grown and they're moving out of the house, and he is no longer defined by this like sort of father of young children identity that he held on to for so long and that really informed his movies. This is just it's a really interesting lesson in just what Shyamalan does as a filmmaker. I think it's a fantastic movie. Number 34 is Gaspar Noé's Vortex. This is a film that I found so emotionally draining that I had to watch it in 3 different sittings. I have had people with dementia in my life, and memory issues in general have kind of followed me and my family forever. This film very accurately portrays what it is like to have someone in your family who has issues with memory, and it is so accurate, in fact, that I almost didn't even finish the film. It is truly a staggering piece of work that I think everyone should seek out if you are especially interested in like confrontational cinema. And I know Gaspar Noé is kind of famous and maybe notorious for his confrontational films, but this is confrontational in a very different way. This is not a film that provokes in the same way as something like Irreversible or Climax or Into the Void. This is very much a more quiet devastation that really slowly takes over the film, and it's shot in a very unique way. It's kind of a split screen. So like here you have the perspective of one character, and then here you have the perspective of another character, and they operate as like single shot, almost real time sequences where you are getting multiple angles of what the husband and the wife are doing. And Dario Argento is in this film as an actor. He's really good. This movie, I will probably never watch it again unless I make like a video essay on it or something. But it is a remarkable piece of filmmaking, and I think full of the kind of pathos and just devastation that Gaspar Noé is known for. Number 33. Number 33 is Brian De Palma's Body Double, which I just found extremely fun to watch, and I have really nothing to say about it other than I think this is a very fun movie. I think this is maybe the closest Brian De Palma ever got to making his Hitchcock movie. It is very much just what if Vertigo, but this basically. It's really good. I think no one does a chase scene quite like De Palma. And I think when he's on, and when he's not on, he's really, really not on. But this is a movie that I had a lot of fun with, and it has these really great locations. The like bachelor pad, Space Needle apartment is like one of the coolest I've really ever seen in a movie. I think it's a really interesting. It's an interesting movie, and it does not really hold up well politically today, as many of De Palma's films are, I guess, notorious for at this point. But this is a movie I had a lot of fun with, and I think it's a movie that De Palma had a lot of fun making. You can really feel like the creative excitement really flowing through every scene of this movie. So this film, number 32, is a really unusual movie in the sense that I feel like it in some ways invented the YouTube video essay many years before there were YouTube video essays. It's Los Angeles Plays Itself. It's directed by Tom Anderson. This is a film that takes Los Angeles as a location from films and essentially takes footage from hundreds and hundreds of films that were shot in Los Angeles, and it is an essay that is narrated over this footage about Los Angeles and how it has changed over the decades and how it has been featured in films. And so it is really a very political movie. It is about the changing demographics of Los Angeles, both in reality and in the depiction of Los Angeles. And it doesn't really discern between like low art or high art or famous or obscure movies. It just covers basically every movie that was shot in Los Angeles for the, from 1920 to 1997. I've never really seen a movie like this before, and the only thing I can really compare it to is YouTube video essays. It is an extremely compelling movie, and I think that it is extremely critically astute when it comes to how certain places are portrayed in films and how that will politically activate or bias or sway the general public and the international public about that place. It is unlike anything, and I think in the best way possible. I watched this film 3 or 4 times over the last 6 months, and I couldn't get over how detailed it was. And this was made during a time where we're sourcing all of this footage and knowing all of these disparate films and their usage of Los Angeles and locations and things like that was really difficult knowledge to ascertain. I feel like making this movie now would be less impressive, but the fact that this movie came out in 2003 is really unbelievable. And the amount of research, just the mountain of research you would have to do to make it just makes this movie extremely compelling. And I think anyone who is a fan of movies, of film history, really of politics, especially like 20th century politics, should seek this movie out. It is a really fascinating film. Number 31 is Sergio Solima's film, The Big Gun Down. I love this movie. It is maybe my favorite spaghetti western. The opening track by Ennio Morricone is like shockingly amazing. It has been on like every monthly playlist I've made for the last 6 months since I saw this movie. There are few spaghetti westerns as beautifully photographed and as strangely paced as this movie. It is ultimately a Lee Van Cleef like revenge movie, not unlike a million other spaghetti westerns that you've seen in your life. But this movie is so striking and beautiful, and all of the locations are like otherworldly. And I mean, this movie looks like it was shot on Mars or something. I've never really seen a spaghetti western utilize the Italian landscape quite like this one, and the sort of picaresque, like Odyssey like structure of this film is really interesting. There's this whole side quest that involves this like horse ranch that like I have no idea why it's in the movie, and it's wonderful. Lee Van Cleef is very inscrutable and unknowable. It feels a lot like someone saw The Man with No Name and was like, I don't know, we can just do that, but then found this unbelievable creative streak within the filming of it. Every shot is masterful. The whole third act is like I like wasn't even like breathing. I feel like it is so tightly constructed in its third act, and so wonderfully violent and sadistic in a lot of ways. I really loved this film, and I had never really heard of it before I saw it, and I kind of watched it on a whim and like immediately bought the Blu-ray. I could not get over how much I loved this film. So if you are a fan of westerns, if you're a fan specifically of spaghetti westerns, and you have not seen The Big Gun Down, that is a film you need to seek out like immediately. So we are now entering the top 30 films I saw this year. From here on out, it is a recommendation. If it is on this list from 30 and up, you should see this movie. There are a lot of new films in this top 30. It could be recency bias, I don't know, but there are several 2023 films and a couple of films from 100 years before that. So number 30 is John Wick Chapter 4. I really like the John Wick movies. I am a sucker for exactly the vibes of these movies. I really, really, really like fight scenes. I think the choreography in these movies is kind of second to none at this point. Very few other films, especially film franchises, care this much about choreography. If you're watching like a Marvel film, for example, or even like a Star Wars film or something like that, I find that the choreography is pretty bad. And usually it's shot in such a way that you can't even really tell what's going on. These John Wick films, I mean, Chad Stahelski is a stunt guy, stunt coordinator, former stunt performer. He is really great at choreographing these action scenes. And I think I prefer John Wick 3 just because I think it's a tighter movie, and I think that a lot of the set pieces are more interesting. But Chapter 4 is just like the ultimate lesson in maximalism. Every kind of action scene you can possibly come up with seems to be in this movie. And I feel like the creative spirit behind John Wick Chapter 4 was, if this is going to be the last John Wick movie, what are the ideas that you have? Let's use all of them. And so we have this movie that has a seemingly infinite budget. I know that's not true, but it feels like a giant movie, and it's like almost 3 hours long. We have car chases, we have motorcycle chases, we have fight scenes on endless staircases, we have gunfights, we have hand-to-hand combat, we have one against many, we have two against many. Donnie Yen is in this movie, and he's unbelievable. This is a movie that just seems to contain everything you would ever want from a John Wick film. And I love that. I think that's fantastic. I want a million of these movies. I want there to be a John Wick 10, a John Wick 20. I want 95-year-old John Wick fighting on the same staircase. That's what I want. And so, John Wick Chapter 4, huge recommendation from me. I really loved it. Not quite as kind of transcendent as John Wick 3 is, but what is? You know, very few movies are. Number 29 is George Cukor's The Philadelphia Story, a very lovely screwball comedy. Very few movies are as delightful as this one. If you are wanting just like a warm blanket of a movie to just like wrap around you, watch The Philadelphia Story. I love a screwball comedy. This is probably the best one ever made, barring another one on my list in a little bit. So you would do well to watch The Philadelphia Story. I don't have that much to say about it. It's just very good. Number 28 is Police Story 3, also known as Super Cop. This is a movie that is about 1 hour of not much and 30 minutes of the most incredible stunt work you've ever seen in your life. So Police Story 1 is probably my favorite of the Police Story saga. Police Story 2, pretty interesting movie. I think it makes some weird choices in the second act. But Police Story 3, Jackie Chan and Michelle Yeoh are both in this film. They were having like a stunt off competition to see who could do the craziest stunts. And what we get is the final act of this movie is just people in real life doing these death-defying stunts where it's like they could have totally just died several times. They're like riding motorcycles onto trains and like grabbing onto like rope ladders, hanging off of helicopters. The entire last 30 minutes of this movie is totally insane. I cannot believe this movie got made. I cannot believe they survived making this movie. And then, like, probably the best part of the movie, which is true of a lot of Jackie Chan movies, is the blooper reel at the end during the ending credits, because it is literally just Jackie Chan and Michelle Yeoh like almost dying several times and then getting up and laughing about it. I cannot recommend enough the last 30 minutes of Super Cop. And the first hour of Super Cop, you could really just skip. It's really not very good. But I love the last act of this movie, and I have watched it several times. There's a like a YouTube compilation of all the stunts in this movie, and sometimes I'll just sit and watch that. Police Story 1 is a better movie, but Super Cop is in its last act maybe the most important piece of stunt work ever committed to cinema. It is so good. Number 27 is Across the Spider-Verse. I love Into the Spider-Verse. I think it is maybe one of the best superhero movies ever made. Across the Spider-Verse, I think, is better than that one. This is maybe my favorite superhero movie ever. It is so visually incredible. It is written with character in mind. Every character has a purpose. Every character has a motivation. They're not all the same motivation. The action scenes are vivid and engrossing. Everything makes sense on the screen. Like, I know what's happening. I have like visual space in mind when I'm watching these sequences. The relationships between the characters feel real and intimate and charged. I love this movie. I think it's a fantastic movie. I cannot wait to see what they do with the third one. I think it's the longest animated film ever produced by an American studio. It does not feel its length to me. It is just an exquisitely made film. Number 26 is Ryuichi Sakamoto Coda. So this is a documentary that was released kind of side by side with Async. Now, while Async is a filmed performance of that album, Coda is a documentary about Sakamoto near the end of his life. He had cancer, and he was trying to create what ultimately ended up being his final album. And the film really wrestles with the idea of legacy, with the creative spirit, with the decisions that we make throughout our lives in order to aid our creative endeavors, which maybe hinder our friendships, our love lives, our families. It is really a movie about a person grappling with what he will be leaving behind when he dies. And so it is kind of a haunted film, but I think very life affirming in the sense that Sakamoto seems to really be processing and forgiving himself for who he has been and who he continues to be. And I think he's such a thoughtful and interesting person and such a wonderful artist that it's impossible for me not to like this movie. I love films and documentaries, especially about the artistic process, especially with artists that I find so meaningful and so creatively invested in what he does. And so I really recommend this movie to people who really enjoy watching the creative process and who enjoy learning about where certain ideas come from throughout a person's career and how much their mind changes about their own work. It's interesting to hear him talk about his work from the 70s and 80s in particular and how he feels about it near the end of his life. And the work that he is doing is so different from what he was doing. It's really interesting to see that dichotomy in him. Number 25 is maybe the most surprising movie of the year for me. It's Leslie Manning's Ghost Watch. I kind of bought this film on a lark because I read about it and was very invested in it. And so I bought it and I watched it and I wasn't really ready for how good it was. It's basically a found footage prank that was performed against like the entire British population. It is like a fake BBC news broadcast and a fake live broadcast of a haunted house. But apparently the audience had no idea it was fake. And so when it aired, people just like really reacted very strongly to this. They had a lot of concerned phone calls and letters sent to the BBC. And I think some of this is like mythological, like it's kind of apocryphal, sort of like listening to someone talk about like Orson Welles's, War of the Worlds, where it's like I don't know how much pandemonium actually was caused and how much of this is like kind of marketing or historical creativity, but there is this wonderful like feeling of transgression throughout this whole thing where they have real BBC reporters who are reporting on this fake live broadcast with this like phantom that keeps showing up in this house. It really just feels so singular. They have like a call center where you could call BBC and report sightings in your own community. I've never really seen anything like this before. And apparently it was like kind of buried by the BBC for many years because people were so upset by it and it caused such negative reaction from the British population. But it has been sort of unearthed and released on DVD, and it is so fun. You've got to find it and watch it. Please watch Ghost Watch. Number 24 is Bradley Cooper's sophomore directorial effort, Maestro. I watched Maestro about a week and a half ago, and when it appeared on Netflix, and all I could think about was how in your head you must be when you are following up a movie like A Star is Born as a director who was already famous prior to making their first film. It's interesting that Bradley Cooper was most famous for being in like the Hangover movies for a while, and then became kind of like an Oscar-y guy with his David O. Russell films, with American Sniper. And then he made his own film, A Star is Born, in which he gives a very different performance from what we're used to from him, and a very committed performance, a very actory performance. I love A Star is Born. I think it is a fantastic film. I love the music in it. I love Bradley Cooper's performance in it. I think Lady Gaga is amazing in that movie. I think Andrew Dice Clay is weirdly good in that movie. Dave Chappelle. I mean, I think it's a really great film, and your mileage may vary on that. But I thought it was interesting that he would follow up A Star is Born with a movie like Maestro, apparently Scorsese and Spielberg, who both are producers in this film, saw A Star is Born, like an uncut and unfinished cut of A Star is Born, and gave Bradley Cooper the job of the Leonard Bernstein biopic because both of those directors had been kind of eyeing that project. And I think it's interesting that this is very much like a sophomore effort film in the sense that like he is really like shooting for the rafters. He is doing every directing thing. He's like shooting in black and white. He's using different aspect ratios. He's giving a very committed performance, a very transformative performance. A lot has been said about the nose and all of that stuff. I'm not really going to get into that, but it's interesting that at the end of the day, the most, I think, transcendent element of this film kind of has nothing to do with Bradley Cooper in the sense that Carey Mulligan is really the person who makes this movie special. I think Bradley Cooper is giving a good performance. He's definitely acting a lot in this movie. And I think that there's something to be said for his commitment to learning how to conduct and his commitment to getting the voice right. But it is ultimately a very imitative performance. And I think Carey Mulligan is giving a very like full-bodied, three-dimensional performance in this film, and she is truly unbelievable. I mean, it is a very nuanced and quiet performance compared to the much more boisterous Leonard Bernstein. But it's really Carey Mulligan that makes this movie something special, and I think that her performance is maybe the best of her career in a career of great performances. And so I think that if you are maybe on the fence about watching Maestro, I think it is very much worth it just for Carey Mulligan's performance, not to belittle Bradley Cooper's efforts, but she's just like fully outstanding in this movie. So for number 23, after making Show Me Love and Together, which are both comedy dramas, Lukas Moodysson went in a very different direction with his film Lilia Forever. Lilia Forever is a almost a Lars von Trier-esque film, especially Lars von Trier's like 90s period, where we just watch as a person goes from living a fairly normal, comfortable life to either dead or wishing they were dead. You are just watching a person be stripped of every single thing that made them happy for the entire runtime of the film. Lilia Forever is about human trafficking. It's about homelessness. It's about poverty. And we are watching as a young girl experiences the worst possible circumstances, and then they get worse, and then they get worse and worse and worse. It is a film that I'm probably not going to return to unless I have to. And I can't think of a time where I would have to return to a film, but this is a film that you endure. And I think it is very well made. The performances are fantastic. I think that the pacing, the structure, all of that is really, really well done. But it is a movie that really punishes the audience for its entire runtime. And I am kind of a sucker for that kind of movie. And so I would recommend it. But if you are a person who is really, really sensitive to this kind of endurance test for the audience, please stay away from it because you are not going to have a good time. It is not a movie in which you have a good time. And everything that you are afraid of happening will happen, and it will happen worse than you thought it would. So if you are a person who like watches like Breaking the Waves and you're like, why would a person enjoy this movie? Don't watch Lilia Forever. It is the same vibe as that. Number 22 is the Ernst Lubitsch screwball comedy Trouble in Paradise, which is the opposite in every way of Lilia Forever. This is a true screwball comedy in every sense of the word. Every line is funny, every shot is funny, every performance is operating at like 1.5 speed. It is like turbocharged. It is like someone watched every screwball comedy and put it into an AI generator and it sped out this. And I mean that as a compliment. This is a fast, engaging, hilarious, low stakes kind of a puffball of a movie. And I could probably watch it every day and have a good time with it. Number 21 is Uzak by Nuri Bilge Ceylan. He has been showing up a lot in this list because I watched all of his films this year for the first time. So Uzak is kind of like a sequel to Clouds of May. where Clouds of May is about a young filmmaker making his debut film with the people that it's about, but kind of lying about the circumstances in which he grew up. Uzak is about like a couple of years later, where this guy has made a couple of other films, and his cousin moves in with him, and it's really about just like roommates that don't operate at the same level. Where, I mean, there's a scene where the protagonist is like, yeah, let's watch a movie together. So they watch Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris. It's a very, very funny scene. They also watch Stalker, I think. It's a funny scene because it seems that Ceylon is self-aware enough to understand that his tastes are obscure or particularly not very fun for like a man in his early 20s. And he pokes fun at himself. I mean, he's really like his own antagonist in this film. Like, he is the bad roommate in a lot of ways. But this is a film where we really get a sense of the poverty in Turkey and the excellent circumstances in which Ceylan seems to be living when he's in Istanbul. It is a film that is, I think, in a lot of ways, a an apology for who he is, or he seems to feel a lot of guilt about who he is and the role he represents in Istanbul. And so for that reason, it is really interesting that the first like four films of his career are really about him apologizing for who he is. And then his later films seem to take that basic theme and really run with it. There's a lot of self-hatred in there about his role as an artist and about the the fiction that he seems to live inside of. So we have now made it to the top 20. If you have fast forwarded through 80 of these films to make it to the top 20, that's fine. I don't care. I understand completely. This is a long video. So if you're just tuning in for the last 20, hello, welcome. For number 20, we have Rainer Werner Fassbinder's Fox and His Friends, a movie I loved, a queer cautionary tale about winning the lottery and making the wrong friends. This is a film way ahead of its time. This was made in 1975 in Germany, and it is about an openly gay man and openly gay relationships. And not only that, but it is brave enough to show us that sometimes gay men can also be not great. So Fox plays kind of a moron who kind of accidentally wins the lottery, and then all of these different people try to poach his money from him. It is a comedy of errors. It's a tragedy. It is soapy and melodramatic. All the things that make me love Fassbinder's work. This is a movie you should seek out. It's fantastic. Number 19, Lukas Moodysson's sophomore effort, Together, which is a hilarious movie about a commune slash cult of artists and freaks who take in a family that is trying to desert a terrible, abusive man played by the fantastic, late, great Michael Nyqvist. This is a movie that I have watched like 4 times in the last few weeks. I think it is so funny and so fully realized. Each character feels like a real person. It seems to both celebrate and satirize the people who would live in a commune like this. This is, I think, the most touching and effective and affecting work that Lukas Moodysson has made. This is a fantastic film, and I think that it really aligns with his Bergman slash Cassavetes roots. It is a movie that it's consistently funny and moving and touching and sweet, but also a little sour. Number 18 is Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. This is probably his most overt Tarkovsky-esque film. It is beautiful to look at, a lot of rich landscapes of the Turkish rural countryside. It's a film that is ostensibly about a search for a body, but ultimately this is a movie about what it means to be a part of something, what it means to be a man, what it means to be in a family, what drives you, and at the end of the day, what your goals are in this one and only life that we have. This is a film that is so rich in metaphor and so spiritually intoxicating. I can't really think of another movie like this one outside of the body of Andrei Tarkovsky's work. I think you could compare it to the work of Terrence Malick, but there's a cynicism and a jadedness to this film that Terrence Malick tends to avoid. And so that makes this a pretty singular work. And I think after this, Ceylon goes on to really approach films with his own particular stamp. But this film, I think, is a really beautiful and poetic work of cinema. Number 17 is Ryosuke Hamaguchi's Drive My Car. This is an extraordinary movie. It is mostly conversations taking place in a car. I don't know how Hamaguchi does it, but his 5-hour film, Happy Hour, is similar in this way, which is he has very simple blocking and staging and just lets characters talk to each other. And there's such a rich and textured element to his works that makes them feel so real and so fully realized. And the comparison that I can make is if you've read Dostoevsky, especially his brothers Karamazov, that is what his films feel like, which is very intelligent people with differing worldviews having these rich conversations with each other and revealing slowly throughout the film the different belief systems and morals and ethics and goals and dreams and fears that these characters have. And they really encapsulate and embody an entire culture or generations of a culture in a way that's so, it seems so simple. Like when you're watching his movie, it doesn't really seem like Hamaguchi's doing that much as a filmmaker, but that is the sign of a truly great filmmaker, is that you don't see the hand really at work. You just understand these characters for who they are. You get so immersed and lost in it. His earlier film, Happy Hour, is one of my favorite movies. I love that movie so much. And 5 hours has never gone by faster. It is literally just people sitting in rooms and talking. It's a magic trick that I love. Number 16 is Greta Gerwig's Barbie, maybe the biggest surprise of the year for me. I love Greta Gerwig. I think Little Women is masterful. I love Lady Bird. I think it's hilarious and touching and heartfelt. But this movie is operating at a different level than her other movies. Not to say that I think it's better. I think Little Women's probably a better movie. But this movie is operating with so many different textures and tones that I can't really compare it to any of her other work. In fact, the only movie I can really compare it to is the other Gerwig Baumbach film that has been released in the last year and a half, which is White Noise. I feel like Barbie and White Noise would make a really good double bill, and that White Noise and Barbie seem to be arguing about the same things when it comes to our culture. It's so interesting because it's about commodification and it's about capitalism and it's about creating a brand and an identity and fiercely defending what's yours and trying to wrestle with social expectations of gender and age. And what's really interesting is that Gerwig is able to do what Baumbach does in White Noise with what is essentially a commercial for Barbie and like Mattel products. And I don't really, I mean, sometimes it's a little on the nose and sometimes the sort of like bourgeois feminist aesthetic really shines through. But also, this is a film that was meant to make $1 billion. This is a movie that's supposed to play in malls. It's supposed to play to everyone in the world. It's a 4-quadrant hit. And she's able to include maybe the funniest joke of all time, certainly the funniest joke of the year, which is Barbie says that she doesn't even operate the train system after she's called a fascist. That's like one of the best jokes of the year. This movie is able to toe the line between satire and real emotional resonance in a way that feels easy, but is actually extraordinarily difficult. And where White Noise, I think, sometimes fails to have any kind of emotional depth outside of the cerebral qualities, Barbie hits it. And I think part of that is Margot Robbie is giving a sensational performance in this film, and she's really towing that line of tone perfectly. And of course, Ryan Gosling has maybe a flashier role, and he's wonderful in this movie. Don't get me wrong, but I think Margot Robbie is really performing a magic trick in this film, and is, I think, operating at a height in terms of her craft that we just rarely see in this kind of movie. I love this movie, and I think the more I watch it, the more I will love it. I feel like I've talked about this filmmaker this entire video, but Neri Bilge Ceylan's Winter Sleep is my number 15 film. Again, crazy year for movie watching for me if Winter Sleep is number 15. This was a really great year of movies for me. And Winter Sleep, I think, is, except for one film, Ceylan's masterpiece. It is a film, again, in which he is grappling with the role of the artist and the hubris of the artist in ways that I think are much more deliberate and much more nuanced than he has in previous films. This is a movie about arrogance and the wealthy trying to rationalize their own lifestyles in the face of abject poverty. This is a film about a man who is, at his core, selfish and dangerous, but who believes himself to be the best person he knows. It is a remarkable film, and some of the conversations in this movie would not be out of place in some of the great novels of the 20th century. It is a beautiful, moving, poignant film, and I think that if you are an artist or a writer or someone who thinks yourself a creative person, watch this movie. I think it'll make you grapple with your own sense of self in ways that I think are quite productive. Number 14 is a movie I've been wanting to see for many years, and I was always kind of scared of the runtime. This is an over 4 hour film. It's Love Exposure. So Love Exposure is a movie that I've been hearing about for many years. And for whatever reason, the 4 hour runtime was really scaring me. And I sat down and watched it one day. I thought I was only at the halfway point when it ended. This movie is so fast. That is not a thing you should be scared of. Do not be scared of the runtime of this movie. It feels so fast. There is maybe 3 or 4 seasons of drama, melodrama, plot, story, character arc shoved into this film, where each hour could take up an entire season of network TV, but it's just condensed. It almost plays like a montage for the first 2 hours of this film. And I mean that as a compliment. This movie is fast and weird. I don't really know who it's for. I mean, I loved this movie, so I guess me, but this is a deeply demented, gross, sick, sweet film that is, I guess, a love story, but it is so much more than that. It is almost at the tone level similar to like Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, where it is, again, this like very overstuffed, very condensed, explosive, maximalist thing that is funny and touching and scary and profound and sweet and dumb all at the same time. And that is a crazy line to toe for 4 hours. I've never really seen a movie like it. I'm probably never going to see another movie like it. This is a singular, interesting thing. And if you ever get a chance to watch it, please watch Love Exposure. Don't let the runtime fool you. It feels fast. For a complete swing in the opposite direction, we have Michael Haneke's Amour, which is a film I have avoided because I knew it would just profoundly emotionally damage me, and it sure did. As a person who has had people in my family experience strokes, experience memory loss, the decline of their bodies, I knew that this was going to be a tough watch for me, and it was. Michael Haneke is an expert filmmaker. His craft is impeccable. I feel like no one else has more control over tone and narrative and character than Michael Haneke. I think he's one of the great masters of cinema today. And this film is, I think, much more humanitarian in its approach than many of his films. I think that a knock against him for a lot of people is that he's too cerebral. And I can see that. I can see how people would think that. So this film is I think, For detractors of Michael Haneke, a good place to maybe revisit his work to see how you feel, because there is an emotional resonance to this film that I think is lacking in some of his other work. And this film is nothing if not sweet and sad and just so profoundly tragic. The grief just pervades this film. And I think in its own way, it is perhaps his most effective horror film in terms of this is like best case scenario what will happen to you in your life. And I think the immediate relatability of it to most people will be striking and profound and engrossing in ways that maybe his other work isn't. The final Neri Bilge Ceylan film of this list is The Wild Pear Tree, a movie about a young teacher who moves back to his hometown and through his arrogance alienates everyone who ever loved him. I'm a teacher. This is something that I relate to. It also keeps on with this theme that Ceylan has throughout all of his work of social mobility and intellectual arrogance. Like, because he is well read, because he is familiar with culture and art, because he has traveled, he feels better than other people. This is something I have struggled with my entire life. If I'm going to be vulnerable right now in this video, I have let my cultural taste inform my personality in my life. And the older I get, the less I am that way. But certainly as a young man, certainly as a late teen, early 20s, that was like my whole thing. And I've tried to outlive that and outrun that for many years since. And this film really speaks to the arrogance of specifically a young man just out of college who feels like he just knows more than everyone else, and he doesn't. And this movie consistently teaches him that lesson. It is a beautiful, romantic film in a lot of ways, but also darkly funny. The 11th film on this list is Park Chan-wook's Decision to Leave. Before I saw this film, I just assumed that he would never do better than The Handmaiden. The Handmaiden is kind of a structurally perfect thing, but he proved me wrong. Decision to Leave is Hitchcock, it's Kubrick, it's Soderbergh, it's also uniquely Park Chan-wook, and he is able to obliterate his own story structure and wrap it around this other thing. He starts the movie at the end. The middle of the narrative ends up being the climax. It is just a wonderful little puzzle box that is also just a deeply heartfelt and sad movie about middle age, about love lost, about discovering your own identity, about escaping your past, and about finding a new future. It's a beautiful film. We have finally made it to the top 10 films that I saw this year for the first time. Each of these films could be number one on any given day. And so think of it less as a numbered list and more as a stamp of complete approval for each of the next 10 films. The ranking could change an hour from now while I'm editing. So take that with what you will. Number 10 is a film that I haven't really heard anyone talking about this past year. And I don't know if I've ever really heard anyone talk about it, period. Maybe I'm just not running in the right circles. For whatever reason, I just have not heard people talk about Great Freedom. Great Freedom is a 2021 film about two gay men who are imprisoned because of their homosexuality and spend the majority of the next several decades coming in and out of prison, falling more in love with each other. It's a story of a relationship unfolding over many decades. Franz Rogowski, who is quickly becoming one of my favorite working actors, gives a really transcendent performance in this film. This is a deeply sad and moving film, but it's also really romantic and deeply felt and poignant for much of its runtime. This is a film that does not make prison look very fun, and it certainly sheds a light on what a lot of gay men had to go through in East Germany. So this is a film that has not left me since I watched it. This was the first film I watched in 2023. I watched it January 1st of 2023, and it just still resonates just as much as it did a full year ago. It is a really, really beautiful movie. I watched it on Mubi, and I think it's still there. So I would highly, highly recommend that you watch that film. Number 9 is also a film I haven't really heard anyone talking about, and I kind of watched it on a lark on Shudder, and it is Resurrection by Andrew Siemens. This is a film that has not gotten itself out of my head since I watched it. It is kind of a two-hander between Rebecca Hall and Tim Roth. Rebecca Hall plays a woman who is haunted by something from her past, and as she has outrun it and found success in her life, she goes to this seminar for work, and a person from her past, played by Tim Roth, shows up, and she immediately goes into despair and panic and anxiety. And this film really, I think, articulates anxiety and panic better than most movies I've ever seen. This movie is a complete surprise to me. Rebecca Hall is unbelievable in this movie, and it takes some weird turns. There are some plot twists in this movie that you, I promise, will not be able to predict. The real centerpiece of this film is a 15-minute monologue from Rebecca Hall, given in one close-up shot that just gets closer and closer to her face. And it is, I think, the best acting I saw this year. An unbelievable performance. And it is a frightening film, and it's frightening only through the conversations that are had really between Tim Roth and Rebecca Hall. Tim Roth is really good in this movie. He should play this kind of character more often. He is a freak. My number 8 film for this year is This Much I Know to Be True, directed by Andrew Dominique. If 20,000 Days on Earth is about Nick Cave the myth, then This Much I Know to Be True is about Nick Cave the man. This is a movie that strips him of all of his mythology, and what we are left with is a man who is really coming to terms with celebrity, who's coming to terms with being a father and a husband, aging, finding depth, new depth in his work that he never saw before. We get a glimpse of Warren Ellis's deeply disturbing desktop, where it's just like a catastrophe of desktop icons. The performances in this film, in terms of the music performances from Carnage and from Ghosteen, are impeccable. The lighting, the beautiful black and white photography, the beautiful color photography. This is a film that I have watched, I think, 8 or 9 times this year. I absolutely adore this movie. And I think that it has deepened and enriched my love for Nick Cave and Warren Ellis as artists and as human beings. Number 7 is Joanna Hogg's sequel to The Souvenir Part 2. It was released in 2021, and it is kind of an unmaking of Part 1, in which the main character decides that as her film school thesis, she is going to make a film about her relationship that we watched her have in the first Souvenir. This movie is, I think, perfect. It is maybe a perfect movie. It has a perfect soundtrack. The performances are unbelievable. It is sad but funny. The first Souvenir has this like haunted, almost oppressive quality, and Part 2 has a lot of life in it. And even though it's a movie about grief, or that at least contains a large amount of grief, it is really a movie about the freedom of youth, the freedom of expression, the exuberance of creative life. And it's also about someone making their first movie and making a lot of mistakes. And I have made a movie, and it was full of mistakes. And so I really related to that. This is a movie that I plan to return to over and over and over again. It is a gorgeous thing. Apart from Barbie, maybe the biggest surprise of the year for me is Godzilla Minus One. Godzilla Minus One is a sincere and populist film about PTSD, about grief, about survivor's guilt, and about saving the people that you love. It is a fully sincere and earnest epic, the way that like David Lean would make a Godzilla film. It is a film about character first, Godzilla second. And usually with a Godzilla movie, it is either way more interesting as an interpersonal drama or way more interesting as a monster movie. And this movie is maybe the only Godzilla film I've ever seen that really skirts the line between both of those things very expertly, where the Godzilla stuff feels just as important as the human stuff. And so I really recommend this movie, especially to people who are maybe unsure of why Godzilla is a popular franchise to begin with. I think that this is a really beautiful movie, and in a lot of ways, the political sort of historical revisionism of it is deeply fascinating as someone who has maybe like a cursory knowledge of 20th century Japanese history. It seems to be making a lot of bold political statements that are surprising for a movie that was produced in Japan. My number five film also stars Franz Rogowski, and this is Passages by Ira Sachs. Franz Rogowski portrays maybe the worst person who ever lived in this movie, but he is also, of course, engrossing and compelling in all the right ways. He plays a filmmaker who is married to Ben Wishaw's character, and he decides he's going to have an affair with a woman that he met on the set of his film. This is a movie about a man just consistently making terrible decisions over and over and over again. And for some reason, we are compelled to continue watching. It is a movie about addiction, I think. It's about a man who is addicted to falling in love, but not necessarily to being in love. He loves to be loved, he loves to have control. And Ira Sachs has never been better as a filmmaker. I think that this movie is so emotionally rich and complex, and I think it has a lot to say about relationships. My number four film is a movie that has really grown on me since I saw it. That is Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. Asteroid City seems to be a movie about making movies, which is maybe true of every Wes Anderson film, but this is a movie about a man grappling with his own legacy in real time. And this is, of course, a year in which a lot of filmmakers seem to be grappling with their own legacies, and a lot of the movies that I've listed already. But Wes Anderson is engaging with his role as a storyteller in a way that I haven't really seen a filmmaker do. Maybe Spielberg with The Fabelmans. And Wes Anderson packages it in this exuberant pastel like music box thing. And it's so strange that maybe his brightest and most exuberantly shot film is also perhaps his saddest film. And it's got like a freaky little guy in it from space. We have Tom Hanks in this film. We have Steve Carell in this film. We have people new to the Wes Anderson thing, but there is something so haunted about it as well. And I know I've used that word a lot. I've watched a lot of haunted movies this year, but the frame narrative around this, all of the Adrian Brody stuff, all of the Edward Norton stuff, just feels so rich with Wes Anderson really coming to terms with what it means to be an artist. And not unlike the Ceylon films that I've been talking about, what is the point of an artist and what is the point of portraying another person? The method actor stuff, the period stuff, all of it just works so well together to create this tapestry that I feel like Wes Anderson's really operating in as a writer a much higher space than he has been for a long time. My number three film is Claire Denis' Beau Travail. Beau Travail is basically a dance film, sort of, about French soldiers living in Africa, and they're not at war, they're not fighting, they're not doing anything, they just train all day and all night. And it's a wonderful, beautiful film. It's a dance movie without music. It is so controlled and so emotionally distant that whenever the emotion does strike, there's really nothing more transcendent. This is maybe the greatest last minute of a movie ever. And I'd heard about this movie for years. I love Claire Denis, and I love a lot of her work. It's kind of maybe embarrassing that it took me so long to get to Beau Travail, but now that I'm here, I don't know if there is a better Claire Denis film. This is maybe an encapsulation of all the things that she is so exquisite at. And the performances, the tone, the just unbelievable control of this film is unlike anything really I've ever seen. My number two film is a film that I have maybe thought about every single day since I saw it, and that is Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. I had, I would say, medium expectations for this film. The last few Christopher Nolan movies have not really hit for me in the way that maybe his earlier work did. And I thought maybe I was like growing out of the Christopher Nolan thing. I don't really know. I feel like I was losing my appreciation for him as a filmmaker for whatever reason. And now that I have seen Oppenheimer, I am all in. I am locked in on the Nolan thing. This is an extraordinary film. It is a film that is so experimental. I mean, the whole thing cuts like an Eisenstein montage. I mean, this are there even scenes in this movie? It feels like there's just like these long sequences that are just so propulsive. How can you make a 3-hour film about like dudes in suits sitting in a room this white knuckle? Every moment feels so intense and so imbued with meaning that by the time you're done with the film, you're like sweating, you're exhausted. And what have you really seen? I mean, it's mostly just guys in suits sitting down and talking. It's unbelievable what Nolan is able to do with just craft and sound design. The sound design is next level. I mean, I saw this in IMAX, in true IMAX, and this film is so loud and oppressive, and it just grinds at you in a way that I like, in a compliment way. It is just a magnificent thing. And the fact that it is R-rated, that it is this weird, that it is this oppressive, and that it made $1 billion and just selling crazy on the 4K market is a testament to what Nolan is able to do when he is really at the height of his powers. And I am so excited to see what he does next. The best movie I saw this year is Albert Serra's Pacifiction. This is a film about French-occupied Tahiti. It is slow cinema operating as a thriller. It has vibes of maybe Michael Mann. It has vibes of David Lynch. This is a film that is surreal and upsetting and disturbing and mysterious and truly mysterious. Mysterious in the way that like Lynch's Inland Empire is mysterious, in the sense of I'm never gonna know. I will never figure out what's going on in this movie. But that doesn't matter because I love watching this movie. It is experimental, it is dark, it is complicated. I've seen it 4 times. Each time it felt like a different movie entirely. This is absolute pure cinema. I have not been this excited about a movie in a very long time. Pacifiction is an absolute masterpiece. Everyone should see it. That was my top 100 films that I saw this year for the first time. What are some films that you saw for the first time this year that you really liked? Let me know. Also, if you would like to see more videos like this, also let me know. I typically do video essay content, but if you would like more casual, off-the-cuff stuff sometimes, then let me know. I would be very interested in doing more of this. This was fun.